Good morning. The following prelude deserves a little bit of explanation. The text is from a poem inspired by a chapter of the Infancy Gospel of Thomas. This is probably not Jesus' apostle, known as Doubting Thomas. The Infancy Gospel is not part of the canon and is considered apocryphal. This chapter tells the story of a 5-year-old Jesus making clay birds on the Sabbath. When he's called out for working on the Sabbath, his response is to bring these clay birds to life.
When Jesus Christ was 4 years old, the angels brought him toys of gold, which no man ever had bought or sold. And yet with these he would not play. He made him a small fowl out of clay, and blessed them till they flew away. Do Christi Jesus Christ, thou child so wise, bless mine hands and fill mine eyes, and bring my soul to paradise.
Our opening words are a story about St. Anthony. Once a man came to St. Anthony, and he was out in the wilderness, and he was in a hut, and he had no books at all. He didn't even have a Bible. And the man said, "How can you be happy in this room without any books?" And St. Anthony said, "I don't have to have books. Everywhere I look, I see the Word of God. Come, let us worship together."
We are here together in this holy moment, and we're grateful for the winding road that brought us to this place. We are here together in this holy moment, and we're grateful for the winding road that brought us to this place.
Love is the spirit of this church, and service is its law. To dwell together in peace, to seek the truth in love, and to help one another, this is our great covenant.
From Sinai's cliffs it echoed, it breathed from Buddha's tree. It charmed, it Athens' market, it hallowed Galilee. The hammer stroke of Luther, the pilgrim's seaside prayer, the oracles of Concord, one holy word declare. It calls and no new justice, it speaks and no new truth. It ever nobler stature and unexhausted youth. Forever unresounding and knowing not of time, a lost but catch the music of its eternal chime.
The story I have to share with you today is an adaptation of a story about the teacher Jesus, written by one of our Unitarian religious education luminaries, Sophia Lyon-Fawes, from her book of stories called From Long Ago and Many Lands, which was first published in 1948. And the story tells us that when Jesus came into town, people were sure to pass the word around, and many, many people would come to hear him speak. Sometimes there were people who listened to Jesus who were very much discouraged. I wonder if you've ever felt discouraged. Some of the people were so poor that they did not get enough to eat. Some had sick children to take care of at home. Some were very old or injured and always in pain. Some felt that nobody cared for them. And there were others who felt that it was hardly worthwhile trying to be good at all. Have you ever struggled to figure out how to make good choices? Those people felt that no one was ever pleased with what they did, no matter how hard they tried. They felt all the time that their religious teachers were not pleased with them, because many of the religious leaders that they had in that time told them many, many rules for living and expected them to follow them all. And often people would go home after listening to Jesus and they would remember just one little story or one short sentence that Jesus would said. But that little bit they remembered for a long, long time because somehow they liked to remember it. And this is the story of one of those times. One day, as Jesus was speaking, one of those discouraged people asked a question. And he began by saying, "I'm a shepherd. I have to spend long hours out in the open fields, and when eating time comes, I can't always find a stream or somewhere where I can wash my hands before I eat. But it is the rule, is it not, that a person should always wash their hands before eating? Do you wash your hands before you eat?" And so he said, "Do you think, Jesus, that I am a bad person because I have to eat my lunch without washing my hands?" And Jesus said with a smile, "Certainly not. You are not a bad person simply because you eat without washing your hands when you are in the fields and cannot do so. Unwashed hands cannot make a person bad anyway. Goodness and badness are inside of you, not in your skin." And then another person spoke up and asked another question. She said, "There are many of us here, Jesus, who have never learned to read. We have not been able to go to school. There seem to be hundreds of laws that the preachers say we must follow if we want to please our God, but we simply cannot remember them all. Do you think, Jesus, that we are bad because we can't remember all of the laws? Our other teachers seem to think that we are no good just because we don't know much or can't remember." And then Jesus would encourage these people. He would say, "For many years, our teachers have been adding more and more rules to follow, and they have meant to help us. But what they have really done is to make living a good life so hard that none of us can be counted good. I say to you, friends, that being good is not just obeying a large number of rules. You could obey every single one of the rules the teachers have made and still not be really good. Because whether one is good or not depends on how one feels inside one's heart. Do you feel hateful or loving toward others? Do you feel angry or patient with the person who hurts you? Those are things that count. And another person said, that kind of talk sounds good, Jesus, but I wish you would tell us in just one sentence what is most important so that we can't forget. Have you ever felt like somebody was telling you something and it was really hard to keep track of all of it and remember it, even if you felt like it was really important? And so Jesus smiled and said, your wish reminds me of what someone once said to Hillel, that great teacher of ours, of whom you all have heard, he said, speaking to the people who were there with him. He said, the story is told of how a student one day said to Hillel, tell me, Rabbi, what all the laws put together mean, and tell me so simply that I can hear it all while standing on one foot. And at this, everyone laughed. But then Jesus continued and said, Hillel gave the student a very good answer and a very short one. He said, never do to anyone else the kind of thing that is hateful to you. This is all the laws put together. All the rest is just an explanation of that one short rule. And then Jesus added his own thought. He said, I would say this rule in just a little different way. I would say it this way. Do those things to others that you would like to have others do to you. Try the rule, said Jesus. It doesn't take long to say it, but it may take a long time to learn to follow it. And when Jesus' talk was over, the people got up and walked back to their homes. And some of them seemed very much relieved. Jesus had given them something they could understand and something they could not forget. Do those things to others that you would like to have others do to you. It was a very short rule, but one that is still remembered today after more than 2,000 years. And it is often called the Golden Rule.
Sabbath. Excerpts from Abraham Herschel's book. All week we may ponder and worry whether we are rich or poor, whether we succeed or fail in our occupations, whether we accomplish or fall short of reaching our goals. But who could feel distress when gazing at a spectral glimpses of eternity? The Sabbath is no time for personal anxiety or care. For any activity might dampen the spirit of joy. The Sabbath is no time to remember sins, to confess, to repent, or even to pray for release for anything we might need. It is a day for praise, not a day for petitions. Sabbath is one where we abstain from toil and strain on the seventh day from the service of the holy. For the Sabbath is a day of harmony and peace between humans, peace within and peace with all things. On the seventh day, we do not change the state of physical things. It is a day of rest for humans and animals alike. Sabbath is a spirit of peace. So it's more like an armistice, more than an interlude. It is profound consciousness of harmony, of man and the world, of woman and the world, of sympathy for all things, and a participation in the spirit that unites what is above and what is below. All that is divine in the world is brought into union with the holiness. This is Sabbath and the true nature, the true happiness of the universe. Joy. We have joys and concerns today, and there are a lot of people who could stand some good thoughts, some prayers, some meditation. We have the Miller family. We have the Bobby Cruz, the Meyer family, Earl Thornton, Ken, who could stand some prayers, and for his husband Larry. And Larry, if you have the chance to give him a call. Trevor, also keep him in your thoughts and reach out to ask if he needs anything. Sue Evans, Beth Booker, Ellen Peplow. Many people in our congregation could stand just a hello. So feel free to reach out and say hi to them. Remember, joy. A prayer. Quiet my heart, give rest to my soul, and refocus my spirit. For a true renewal comes only from the holy. Help me to be intentional with my time, my worship, and encourage me to find peace and love and rest in the holy. I ask this, that we will always know that on the Sabbath we can release all things and we can enjoy the moment of the divine in ourselves and in the world. Amen.
We are dancing Sarah's circle. We are dancing Sarah's circle. We
Good morning. My name is Claudia Pressley. I'm the Director of Administration here at TVUUC. Today is a designated offering Sunday. What that means is that 100% of your contribution, unless it is marked as a pledge that comes in today, will go to the designated organization. Today's organization is the Lonsdale Elementary School Mentoring Program. A group of volunteers from TVUUC partner with Lonsdale Elementary School to offer tutoring and mentoring. The gifts that you give will go towards buying additional supplies to help with that effort. The way that you can give is to go to tvuuc.org/give, or you can text give to the number 73256, type in TVUUC and the amount. So from all of us, thank you for joining us. Thank you for partnering with Lonsdale Elementary School. Have a wonderful day.
What gift can we bring? What present, what token, what words can convey it? The joy of this day, when grateful we come, remembering, rejoicing. What song can we offer in honor and praise? What gift can we bring? What present, what token, what words can convey it? The joy of this day, when grateful we come, remembering, rejoicing. What song can we offer in honor and praise? Give thanks for the past, for those who had vision, who planted and watered so dreams could come true. Give thanks for the now, for study, for worship, for mission that bids us turn prayer into deed. This gift we now bring, this present, this token, these words can convey it, the joy of this day. When grateful we come, remembering, rejoicing, this song we now offer in honor and praise.
This morning I want to focus on a question that doesn't get asked often enough in theological circles. And the question is this: if Jesus wanted a Bible, why didn't he write it? Jesus didn't place a lot of emphasis on the written word. He spread his teachings through the spoken word. In the South, in the Bible Belt, we place a lot of emphasis on biblical religion, biblical teaching, biblical readings, and biblical interpretations. And it's assumed that the religion of Jesus is synonymous with the religion of the Bible. However, that begs the question: if Jesus wanted his teachings to be in a book that could be conveyed to future generations in an authoritative way, why didn't he write that book? Let's spend a moment reflecting on that question. Jesus was a storyteller. He was a teacher in the oral tradition. He did not write down his teachings. The earliest gospel wasn't written down until after 30 years after his ministry. Before the written word, the tradition was spread by word of mouth. Storytellers spread out throughout the Mediterranean area, and they adapted the story to different audiences. If you've ever wondered why the picture of Jesus looks a little bit different in the Gospel according to Matthew than it does in Mark or Luke or John, why there seems to be different perspectives on this one person, it's because the tradition was passed down by storytellers who were adapting their messages to different audiences. So nothing was written until around 60 after the Common Era, ACE, but then many things were written down. And not only the books that made it into the Bible, but the Gospel according to Thomas, and the Gospel according to Mary, and the Gospel according to Bartholomew, and the Gospel according to Nicodemus, and other books that never make it into the Bible. In each of these Gospels, we get a very different picture of Jesus. In the Gospel according to Mark, he seems like a very down-to-earth teacher, a storyteller. In the earliest version of Mark, there's not even a resurrection story. In the Gospel according to John, he seems like an ethereal being who floats over the land and speaks in long theological treatises. And so you get very different images of Jesus depending on the Gospel. One of the Gospels that doesn't make it into the Bible is the Gospel according to Thomas, and it's mostly a collection of his teachings. But it does include some stories that don't make it into the book, including the very child-friendly miracle of a young Jesus taking clay and turning it into birds. And some of my favorite teachings are in the Gospel according to Thomas. According to the Gospel, one day the disciples came to Jesus and said, "When will this kingdom come, this heavenly kingdom of which you speak?" And he said, "It will not come by people watching for it. It will not come when people say, 'Look, there it is,' or 'Look, there it is.' Instead, the kingdom of heaven is spread across the earth, but people do not see it." On another occasion, he says to the disciples, "If I say the kingdom is in heaven, then the birds will get to it before you. Or if leaders tell you that the kingdom is in the sea, then the fishes will get there before you. But the kingdom of heaven is inside of you and outside of you." So I share these teachings because they illustrate an important point, that there are many interesting stories about Jesus and interesting teachings of Jesus that are not in the Bible. And these teachings and these stories can offer us insights that are important to us. If we cannot see heaven right in front of us, the problem may be with our own eyes or our own perspective or our own attitude. As the Native American leader Tecumseh said, if we find no reason for giving thanks, the fault is in ourselves. So we need to look inward. As the Gospel according to Thomas says in another section, it says, Jesus says to the disciples, "If you bring forth what is within you, then what you bring forth will save you. But if you do not bring forth what is within you will destroy you." So this is an example that what we're looking for, the answers in life, may not be found in a book anywhere. The answers in life may be found from looking within ourselves. I have a Quaker friend named John Ennis, who is the son of a member of this church of blessed memory, Tom Ennis. Now, John is a Quaker, and he describes the Quaker relationship to the Bible by saying, "We're so busy talking to the author, we forget to read the book." In other words, the focus in the Quaker tradition is on direct experience instead of secondhand knowledge. Direct experience without mediator or veil. In the Unitarian Universalist Church, we share that. It comes from the transcendentalist part of our heritage. In our statement about the sources of our faith, it is written, and this is a quote, "We find inspiration in direct experience of that transcending mystery and wonder affirmed in all cultures, which moves us to renewal of the spirit and openness to the forces which create and uphold life." In other words, everything we want to learn about religion can't be found in books. And books can be helpful. It can be helpful to look backward toward the Gospel of Matthew or the Gospel of Mark or even the Gospel of Thomas. It can help to look in the past. But the light from the past will mean very little unless it also illuminates the present. The most important gospel is the gospel of this present moment. As the mystic writer Gustav Mahler said, the purpose of tradition is not to worship the ashes. The purpose of tradition is to preserve the fire. Have you ever noticed how a storyteller can make a story come alive? Just down the road in Jonesboro, Tennessee, there is the International Storytelling Festival. And here's something that will never happen at the International Storytelling Festival. You'll never have someone come up, open a book, and read a story. That will not do. Every storyteller has to memorize the story and adapt it to their audiences. That's what makes the story come alive. And it was this method that kept the gospel alive for over 30 years. At first, the gospel was part of a grassroots movement spreading like wildfire through the Mediterranean area. However, eventually, it became the target of a top-down movement, a top-down effort to standardize the faith and make it uniform. I sometimes call this the corporate takeover of Christianity. The Roman Emperor Constantine is part of the corporate takeover when he makes Christianity the official religion of the Roman Empire. This grassroots, small, nonviolent, communal faith becomes the official religion of a top-down, militaristic empire. It really changes the nature of the faith. Another part of the corporate takeover was the formulation of the Nicene Creed and the Apostles' Creeds and other creeds that decided who was in and who was out. And the creation of the Bible to decide whose stories belonged in the official book and whose stories did not belong. The motivation for corporate takeovers is the same all over the world. If you go into McDonald's, you don't expect to order pizza. And if you go into Pizza Hut, you don't expect to order hamburgers. The purpose of a corporation is to offer a standardized product so that wherever you walk in, you know what you're getting, you know what to expect. And so this was the motivation of the corporate takeover of Christianity, so that you would get the same image of Jesus no matter where you walked into a church. No matter where in the world you walked into a church, you would get the same picture of Jesus. Even so, the standardization doesn't entirely work. The image of Jesus in the canonical Gospels they're not identical. They don't look exactly the same. There's some really contrasts in those books. So the effort to make it uniform doesn't entirely succeed, but it does limit the number of perspectives that are included, and that is a significant limitation. The Reverend John Burns, a former minister of this church who wrote a book called Understanding the Bible, an Introduction for Skeptics, Seekers, and Religious Liberals. And in that book, he says, he makes the argument that the Bible is a human book about the divine. It is not a divine book about humanity. The Bible is a human book about the divine and not a divine book about humanity. Now, there are biblical scholars who will make the argument that it is a divine book about humanity. There are biblical scholars who will argue that the Bible is one book that tells one story with one message, with one meaning for all people. But I think a more historically accurate understanding of the Bible is to see it as an entire library of books, telling many different stories from many different perspectives for a wide variety of people. There are even different versions of the story in the same book. The book of Genesis includes 2 different creation stories that are entirely different from each other. There's kind of a cut and paste job even within some books. Now, there are many books in the Bible. If we include both the Hebrew and Christian scriptures in the official canon, there are 66 books in the Bible. Jesus didn't write a single one of those books. Not a single one. So how are we to make sense of all these different images and all these different perspectives found in so many different books? Well, the answer can come from the text of a sermon that was given by the Reverend William Ellery Channing in the year 1819. He preached an ordination sermon in Baltimore, Maryland, called Unitarian Christianity, where the sermon was so inspirational, it led to the creation of a new denomination, the Unitarian Association. We would later merge with the Universalists, but this sermon gives birth to the Unitarian Church. The text he chose for that sermon comes from the book of Thessalonians, and it reads, "Do not despise the words of the prophets, but test everything and hold fast to that which is good." So what does that text from Thessalonians mean? Well, it could be summarized as that contemporary proverb, don't throw out the baby with the bathwater. In other words, we're supposed to be active agents in seeking meaning when we read the Bible or any other text. Sometimes the words of antiquity can seem lost in the language and culture and traditions and attitudes of another time. And sometimes the teachings that we encounter can be positively offensive, as when they seem to advocate for genocide or misogyny or homophobia or killing children or any other barbaric practices. And yet we can look over the words for wisdom, in search of wisdom. And so basically what William Ellery Channing was saying is don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. The Quakers say the scriptures are a testimony to the fountain. They are not the fountain itself. So what we need to do is test the water to make sure it's pure, to test to make sure it's good drinking water, that it's living water, that it's life-giving water. The Bible can be a particularly hard book to read if you're a woman, or if you're a part of the GLBT community, or if you're a part of any group that wasn't included in the canon, the Gnostics and other spiritual traditions. For this reason, the Unitarian renegade preacher Ralph Waldo Emerson encouraged people to write their own Bibles. He wrote in his journey, "Make your own Bible. Select and collect all the words and sentences that have been to you like a blast of triumph out of Shakespeare, Seneca, Moses, John, and Paul." And we might add Fannie Lou Hamer, and Ella Baker, and Emma Gonzalez, and Bayard Rustin, and Audre Lorde, and Marsha P. Johnson, and Mahatma Gandhi, and the Dalai Lama, and more. I once saw a cartoon of someone who was reading the Bible with a pen in their hand, making this motion, and someone approached them and said, "Are you underlining the passages that have the most meaning for you?" And the person said, "No, I'm not. I'm marking out the parts I disagree with." Now, I know some of my listeners this morning have that attitude toward the Bible, but let me pass on a piece of advice to you that was given to me by Dr. Richard Gardner, who was my professor of New Testament studies when I was in seminary. And he said this directly to me because I had a tendency to question the Bible. He said, "Chris, it's appropriate to question the scriptures, but you also need to let the scriptures question you." And that's a fair point, because sometimes the scriptures want us to be more loving than we want to be, more generous than we want to be, more forgiving than we want to be, less egocentric than we want to be, more concerned about social justice than we want to be. And so it's good to question the Bible, but it's also good to let the Bible question us. Because sometimes there are many deep teachings in the Bible, in that vast library of books, that can speak to us. Love your neighbor as yourself. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Treat people the way you want to be treated. Do justly, love mercy, walk humbly. Forgive and you will be forgiven. Judge not lest ye be judged. Let justice roll down like water, and righteousness like an ever-flowing stream. Welcome the stranger, for by so doing you may be entertaining angels unaware. So many insights that can enrich our lives. Jesus did not write the Bible. He did not write a single book in the Bible, but he did point us inward toward a law that has been placed in our mind and written into our hearts. 30 years after his ministry, some conscientious people made an effort to write down his teachings, and they did the best they could. And they tried to pass down these teachings from generation to generation. However, the mission of this church is not to worship the ashes. The mission of this church is the preservation of the fire, and to kindle a light within all people, to fire into flame the gifts that you have within you, to fire into flame the gifts that we have as a congregation, to fire into flame the gifts of people all over the world, so that the light that came in the world that illuminates everyone can shine brightly. Our duty is not to the ashes. Our duty is to the fire. Our closing words come from the Universalist minister Max Coots. After the words, a quiet. After the psalms, a silence. After the crowd, only a memory recalls the gathering. Peace and justice have need of you after the words, after the music, after the gathering. God grant you the depth of dedication to justice. God grant that you may become an apostle of peace.
Let people living in all lands declare that fear and hate are gone. Rise above differences and stand in love and understanding one.
As our last act of worship, I invite you to greet your neighbor, send a text or an email, or make a phone call. Reach out to someone you haven't seen in a while. Come to our virtual coffee hour after the service, or to our family chapel in the park this afternoon. Sign up for our newsletter to learn more about in-person and online events happening at the church. Go in peace.
When Jesus Christ was for you.